It's finally time for a cook-off between 5 tanks, each with a unique playstyle to determine who can leave the enemy team burning like a hot vindaloo in the morning and who ends up falling as flat as a pancake. There is just 2 rules that the contestants must follow. Try to win at all costs, and whatever you do, don't throw the game. Make sure to comment who you think should win, as the tank with the most votes will be entered into the grand finale, where the winners of each tier go head to head. Let's begin. Our first tank is hot out the oven in the tier 8 French medium, the Barras, taking an early game spot on Fisherman's Bay to get vision on opponents, crossing to get easy free damage, and to get rid of the tanks in the bushes opposite to dominate the middle of the map, and of course the mid to late game. And he supports his team perfectly in doing so. Meanwhile, it's been a very slow start for Dave in the tier 8 Czech heavy as he analyses what's the best recipe for this Jajanki game for the Skoda T56. Phil is also taking things slow on Kampenberg, taking a passive approach in his tier 8 German Borsig by getting friendly with the herbs and leaves in this game. But will it pay off in the end? Steve, on the other hand, in his Progetto is fighting an uphill battle against the rats in his kitchen, as they've already eaten over 2,000 damage of his team with very little resistance, and it will only get worse as they start to infest around his base during the game. I guess it could be worse, as Carlin, the lean mean grilling machine of the KV5, is yet to even find a single ingredient almost after 2.5 minutes, but when the pressure is on, can he scramble together to get everything prepared? As we make our way back to Frank in the Barask, he's being harassed by the locals who apparently don't like him cooking, and whilst making his escape he almost stumbles and loses everything, but with a little composure he's able to capitalise on those locals as they advance, getting multiple damaging shots, one on the IS-6 and one finishing off the tourist stumbling through the kitchen using the bushes to remain undetected. To make matters worse, he gets spotted, but he is able to serve up 2 tequila shots to the enemy light tank, who ends up stumbling his way home with his tail between his legs. Dave is still holding down the centre of Stajanki, being very cautious as he flames up a couple of opponents, but with the other side of the map falling, he really needs to pick up the slack and start doing damage. We'll find out whether he can in just a few minutes. You might have thought, since our last encounter with Phil, he may have moved up, but in a shock turn of events, he's still getting friendly with those bushes. But whilst casually racking up some damage on the enemy team, who seem to be like getting rubbed down by the Borsig's 12.8 centimeter, and since the enemy team like Dave so much, why not make sure to give me some love by hitting the like button if you're enjoying. But with the shameless plug out of the way, Phil's team have disintegrators and it doesn't look good for him right now. Talking about not looking so good, Steve has still been having some trouble with the swarm of angry rats who are currently decimating his team, and the scoreline just keeps getting worse, even with him being able to sweep away a few of those hit points on the enemy team. But by the end of this portion of the game, his team are down by 5,000 hit points even after heating up the waffle perfectly. It's been a while since we've seen Carl, but don't worry, he is about to turn up the heat and is about to find himself surrounded by angry customers, but luckily in World of Tanks you can send them packing using the thick steel of this Soviet frying pan and making sure he's getting the best prime steak when he shells out for those rounds. In just mere minutes he's been able to cook up all those pesky animals on that hill, dealing thousands of damage and blocking almost the same amount. A true expert under pressure, that's for sure. Swapping back to Dave in the Skoda, he's been able to capitalise on the enemy team's overcommitment and tenderises their meat before they even know what to say, taking him to this top spot on damage between all the contestants so far. Just watch how easy it is for the Skoda T56. But Frank is certainly not happy about it after hearing that he's been taken down a peg in the damage rankings and is getting incredibly frustrated by a seasoned veteran in the Pig who has been running wild in his game, trying to barge him back to the garage. So as any sane person would do, he picks up a little damage on his stroll to run headfirst into this prized little piggy, the Burt. But let's just say it's good riddance, that guy. But it's certainly not over, as he's been forced to defend himself against the rest of the enemy team, who have taken control of the south of the map. But in a delayed retreat, he picks up multiple shots, and whilst rushing to his next barbecue station, finds a little Sturer Emil, who's cosplaying Phil from the other game in the Borsig in the bushes, but unfortunately it doesn't work out too well. But during this time, a shock turn of events comes in with a rat with wings, otherwise known as a seagull, or to you and me, a Chi-Ri, comes swooping in, trying to run Frank out of the kitchen. But with some support from his only teammate, he is the latest on the chopping block and gets sent back to the garage where he belongs. But the enemy team is still capping, so watch how he manages to reset this base. Panning back to Dave, we see he's been under constant attack from the critics and is pinned down. But with a few kind words, he sees off those critics, but does take a fair bit of damage in the meantime, with a waffle encounter that leads to Dave not looking all too healthy anymore and forcing him to be pinned completely. But his teammate helps throw that waffle straight in the bin, but it's not over yet because a tourist has stopped by, but we'll have to wait to see if he can come out on top in just a minute. You may have forgotten about Phil and his handful of bush, but he's been able to make friends with not just one specimen of all natural grass, but two, as he farms the advancing tanks using the double bush mechanics. But with a steaming hot grill staring him right in the face, he may just end up getting burnt. Talking about getting burnt, Steve has avoided touching the hot stove so far and been able to solidify himself as the head chef in this game, defending against those pesky rats, serving up a few of the APCR rounds while the enemy team aren't looking, getting scratched by the Conway unfortunately for the first time with only 6 minutes remaining. Since we last saw Carl, his campfire had started to cool down, but with a healthy dose of premium quality shells, he's been able to light up the enemy team, cracking through the last few tanks and securing the hill for himself, even if he does end up almost cooking himself with a few bounces off the BZ. But the pros mess up from time to time. But even with 3 tanks surrounding Carl, he's going to be able to use a KV-5 to finish them all off and continue with how he wants to run his kitchen. Swapping back to the French connoisseur and his Barasque, he picks up a few more hits on the enemy's M6, but may have celebrated just a little bit too soon with the red wine, as he stumbles too quick into the enemy's camp, and although getting a few good jabs in, quickly taken out, ending his game and resulting in a loss for the team. Dave is ecstatic at the news of Frank's demise and maybe a little bit too happy as he gets distracted and attempts to make love to a building column. But apparently the tourist from earlier is oblivious to this blunder and strolls past without notice. He does seem to cotton on to Dave's antics though with the column and comes to try it out for himself, trading terribly against Dave, and rather than taking Dave's riches decides to retreat while he's reloading, allowing Dave to finish another dish and leaves Dave in search of the most prized ingredient within World of Tanks, the succulent pork loin, quickly shutting him down and securing a score of over 9,000 damage. Our favourite herb specialist has been rooted to the spot since we last saw him, and with some good marksmanship is able to turn off the grill and get a few more shots on the last remaining tanks, who seem more interested in taking a dip in the lake than the 12.8cm cannon slamming shells into their backside, allowing Phil to win the game and take a shot of his own to celebrate. In other news, while Carl is attempting to leave his restaurant and head for the Hollywood Hills to celebrate his accomplishments in this game, he sees out the corner of his eyes the most toxic animal known to man, the E25. Whilst the cockroach avoids his team, Carl slams down the cookbook on top of him, squashing the roach, allowing him to progress towards the last remaining tanks and close the restaurant for the night. And if you like seeing things get slammed, then why not slam that subscribe button? Whilst all the other chefs have been making light work of their games, Steve in the Progetto is battling hard to finally finish off the last remaining rats with no help from his own team, leaving him alone against 3. And whilst the rats try their hardest, they just can't match Steve, and he's been able to cut through 2 of the tanks using the old bait and switch, but unfortunately, having thrown everything at the opponents, including the kitchen sink, he has absolutely nothing left to fight with and has to succumb to the draw. As unfortunate as that may be, yeah, it just feels terrible. And that concludes what the contestants have to offer for today's World of Tanks Cook-Off Tier 8 edition. Make sure to vote on who you thought cooked the hardest in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to see when the next episode goes live.